Today we're discussing The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali.
Hi, guys.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Hi.
I'm sorry for the delay. I was running a little bit late for some other reasons, but we're all here now. Before we start, I just want to introduce Marjan. Am I saying your name correctly? Marjan Kamali.
Mhm.
For joining us today. Thank you so much for making the time to meet with us. Marjan was born in Turkey to Iranian parents. She spent her childhood in Turkey, Iran, Germany, Kenya, and the US, so you've traveled extensively. She holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of California, Berkeley, a master's of business administration from Columbia University, and a master of fine arts in creative writing from New York. She is currently a scholar in residence at the Women's Studies Research Center at Brandeis University and lives in the Boston area with her family. Her novels have been published and have been in translation in 25 languages. She's written The Stationery Shop, which we all just finished reading, Together Tea, and The Lion Women of Tehran, which will be published later this year. So welcome, Marjan.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to your book club.
No,
Um, Happy to be here with all of you. Thank you all for making the time to come.
no, thank you for making the time to come. Before we get into the book and the story we just read, I wanted to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about your writing process.
Sure, sure. Writing a novel is a huge undertaking, and I'm a very slow writer because these books take so much out of me emotionally. My process is I have very different stages, and I behave differently through each stage. So when I'm in the first draft mode, I don't really plan anything. I just sort of discover the story as I'm writing. So with all three of my books, I started not knowing what the plot was, but I just knew a little bit, like maybe I had an image. So for example, with the stationery shop, I had the image of an elderly man in a wheelchair in an assisted living center looking out the window. And that's what I started with. And then as I wrote, I discovered the story. So I'm very freewheeling in the first draft. But then once the first draft is done, then I kind of completely change tactics and I become super organized and practical. And in the second draft stage, there's like a complete regutting of everything I've done. And that's very intentional and very organized. And then I would say the last stage is the third and final draft, which is just revision, like mechanical things. But it makes it sound like there's three drafts, but there's really more like 12 because that second draft stage is multiple drafts.
How long does it take you from like concept to publishing?
Well, my first book, Together Tea, took me, I'll be honest with you, even though we're being recorded, I'll be honest with you. From the time I wrote the first sentence until when it was out in the bookshops was 13 years. And
Wow.
yeah, 13 years. I had two kids in the middle of that. So I took 6 years off. So I don't know if I should minus the 6 years, but all told, the entire journey took 13 years. And part of the reason for that is it was my first book, so I didn't have the experience of writing a novel yet. Also, nobody was waiting for it. I could have taken 26 years. Nobody would have cared.
Yeah.
Nobody was waiting. But with the stationery shop, it took 3.5 years. And with the Lion Women of Tehran, it took about 3.5 years too.
So that's your standard once you get going then.
Yeah, now that I know what I'm doing. And also people are waiting, which is a big difference.
What would you say is your favorite time of day and place to write?
I like to write between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m., which I know is a luxury because if you have a full-time job, that's not available to you. Um, but I'm in a position of privilege now because I have a part-time job teaching, so I can do those magical hours. Everybody's magical hours are different. I have friends who get up at 5 before they go to work. I have friends who love to write at night. After like 5 p.m., my brain kind of just says goodnight. So it's usually in the morning hours that I do the writing.
Um, so I sorry. I know that you grew up in the area, but how much research went into this book being that it's historical fiction?
Tons of research. So, um, I'm assuming most of you have read the book and you know that the present day scenes, well, they're 2013. The 2013 scenes take place in the Boston area. I live in the Boston area. I know the Boston area. Where are you guys actually, Michelle?
Oh, we can go around. Sometimes we all introduce ourselves. I'm based out of Miami. I think the majority are, but we have some from different places. So, you want to introduce ourselves to Jennifer? You can go first.
Hi, I'm also in the Miami area. I'm a teacher.
Oh, nice to meet you.
You
Belis-
too.
Belissa.
Hi, I am Belissa, and I am in the Denver, Colorado area.
Very nice. Nice to meet you.
Elsa, welcome. This is
Ah,
your first time.
yes, yes. Hi, I'm Elsa. I'm retired and I'm from the Miami Lakes area.
Oh,
Very
you're close
nice.
to us. And Audria.
Hi, I'm Audria. I'm a writer, but not as interesting. I write grants and proposals for a nonprofit.
I did that once upon a time for a laboratory, but yeah. And are you in Miami too?
Yes. Yeah, I'm in Miami.
So this is so cool that most of you are Miami based or have roots in Miami. Um, yeah, so a lot of times when I do book clubs with Boston people, they recognize a lot of the Boston places. But to your question, Michelle, obviously there are a lot of scenes in Iran. I have been in Iran, I not for very long, but I lived there briefly as a kid and I also visited as an adult. But obviously the Iran scenes take place in 1953
Yeah.
and I wasn't around, so I did a ton of research. I read books about that time period. There are many books about what specifically happened in 1953 in Iran, especially because of the coup d'etat. There's a lot of information out there. So I read books, I looked online, lots of newspaper sort of articles. I also could interview people who had lived through that time because a lot of my own elderly relatives had lived there at the time.
Mhm.
So I talked to whoever would give me the time of day. A lot of them didn't. They didn't want to talk to me.
Oh,
They didn't want to talk about that time. For some of them, it was painful. And also that generation doesn't like talking about themselves. But in the end, it was my father who helped me the most because he did open up and he shared with me a lot of details about not just like politics, but things like what were they wearing? What kind of shoes were people wearing? What pastries were they eating at the cafes? He was very specific. What films were playing at Cinema Metropole? What did Cinema Metropole look like? All those places are real. Every street is real. He wanted me to get it right. And at one point I said to him, no one cares. No one cares if I name the square or something else. But then when the book was done and it went to Simon and Schuster, they fact checked everything. Even though it's a work of fiction, it's a novel, but all the street names are correct, the squares are correct, it's all geographically accurate. They looked at maps of Old Tehran. So a lot of that stuff, all the stuff I say that's non-fiction-y, has been very well researched.
that's really cool. Do you think that people maybe didn't want to speak about that time who lived through it, depending on what side of the political side they were on?
Yeah, they were upset. I think a lot of Americans don't realize how painful that time was for Iranian people. This is pre this current regime that we all talk about and hate. This was way back, this was like 1953. They had a democratically elected prime minister, and then the coup was, it was helped by the US and the UK. So there's a lot of bitterness for that generation because they feel betrayed.
Okay, now, as we get into the book, I like to make this an open discussion. I don't have to be the only one asking questions and leading the conversation. If anybody has anything they want to say or question, just flag me, and you guys are more than welcome to chime in. So, the stationery shop, I absolutely loved it. We received so many messages of ladies that were up past 5 in the morning reading this beautiful story. For the characters, were they based on anybody real, or do you get influences from people in your life when you're writing?
Um, yeah, I was really excited to write the second book because my first novel, like many, many first novels, was semi-autobiographical. So together, the main character is my age. A lot of her experiences are my experiences, not all of them, but it's very semi-autobiographical. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna make everyone up. But you never really make everyone up. And any author who tells you that is lying. You always borrow from people you know or borrow from your own emotional truths. So the character of Bahman, I shared with you guys that I just had that one image to begin with of him sitting in the assisted living center and he was looking out the window. That was inspired by a real man I met because I was asked to read for my first book at an assisted living center. And there was an old gentleman there, and he kept talking to me about all these amazing things he'd done in his life. Like he said, he traveled with Charles de Gaulle and he met the Prince of Spain. And I thought, to be very honest with you, that he was making it all up or just, losing some of his faculties. But I later found out it was all true. Everything he was saying was true. He was actually like a big dignitary in Iran. He was Iranian. So he inspired that image of an elderly man in an assisted living center with the past that people don't believe or maybe they don't care about. And he inspired that, but then obviously the rest isn't his life. The sister relationship, I wouldn't say Roya and Zari are my sister and me, but I will say that I'm very familiar with that sort of sibling relationship where your sibling is the person you would give your right arm for, and yet they annoy you to no end. So, the Roya Zari relationship is something I was very kind of familiar with that dynamic. And then I did borrow. And then there were parts where I wanted to explore and learn things because I wanted to know more. For example, mental illness. I felt that when I was growing up in my own family, in my extended family, we didn't talk about mental illness. We acted like it didn't exist. And the irony is, it did exist. It existed in my very own family. And I had a family member who suffered from it. And I remember every time I asked my parents, why is she like that? Why is she so sad? Or why did she do that? They would only say, she can't help it. It's not in her hands. And that's all they would say. And so I wanted to write a character who suffers from mental illness, and she causes great harm to herself primarily and to the people she loves, not because she has bad intentions, but because she's triggered by trauma. She has no treatment, let alone diagnosis. So there were a lot of things that I deliberately did that I didn't know about in order to learn about them.
I'm of Hispanic descent, and I know a few on here are, and I think it's the same with our culture. like our parents and grandparents generation, it's not something, mental illness is not something that's spoken about. And if it is, they just say in a loving way, not in a derogatory way, like that person's crazy, just ignore them, which sounds horrible in modern times or in our own society or age group, thinking like you just say, oh, that person is crazy. They don't mean it with malice, just like it doesn't, it's not talked about, like just ignore it and keep going on.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like in my culture, it was very similar. It was sort of like pushed under the rug, and like you said, not out of malice. I mean, there was a lot of compassion for the person suffering, but it was the family members who bore the brunt. And that's what I wanted to show with Batman, our hero. He takes care of his mother and he loves his mother. He's also deeply frustrated by his mother. And I wanted to show these conflicting emotions we can have for those we love the most, especially our parents, because we can love them with all our hearts and yet be completely burdened by their needs. And that's what I wanted to show. He's struggling. But he would never abandon his mother. He just wouldn't. That's not what you do in this culture.
Now that we're talking about her, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit in the questions since we're on the topic of mental illness and Bodman's mother. In chapter 14, when we learn about the history between her and Mr. Bakri, that caught me completely by surprise. I kind of like got a glimpse that there was some kind of relationship when they're at the engagement party and he's talking to her, but I thought that he just knew her from town, not that there was like a past history with them. So I wanted to ask you, being that she had a similar experience to Raya by falling in love outside of your class, why was she so hesitant and against it rather than being supportive, being that she went through something similar?
That's a really good question because you could argue she suffered herself for the very same reasons, right? So why wouldn't she give Roya what she herself was deprived of? Well, I think people react differently to suffering. Some people, because they've suffered, once they grow up or, are in a different position, decide, I don't want anyone else to go through what I did because that's just so horrible. Other people, I think, are like, well, I suffered, why shouldn't you? Like in medical school, a lot of interns are completely abused emotionally and with their time, and they're asked to do all these things that are not fair. And then when those interns become doctors, you would think maybe they'd say, hey, you know what, let's put a stop to this cycle. But they're like, no, you go through it, little kid. It's almost like they want to, I don't know, hurt people. So that's how I think she is. She's so damaged. And we know she's suffering from a mental illness. So it's not like she is the best version of herself at all. Um, I do think too, if I were to think about her motivations, she knows how being from a lower class basically ruined so much for her because A, she was physically kind of violated. You could argue it was consensual. I wanted it to be murky, but she was also discarded. She wasn't respected. She saw how being from a lower class just made her life miserable. So I think it's almost like she has a chip on her shoulder and she wants her son to marry even into a higher class. It's almost like she's obsessed with him. It's not like Roya is even from a low class, she's middle class, but she's obsessed with her son ascending, ascending, ascending. And maybe because she knows how horrible it is to be poor in that culture.
Yeah, but I kept reading and I'm like, she ended up with all these opportunities because she married up, like,
She did
and it
eventually.
didn't hold her husband back by marrying down. So wouldn't she have felt the same for her own son?
Yeah. I think she also just didn't like Roya that much. She just didn't like her. Like they don't like each other.
Yeah.
And I was trying to show sometimes you meet someone and you just don't like them and you don't know why. Like there's zero chemistry.
Yeah.
And that's the case. And it goes both ways. Roya didn't like her, you know. Um, yeah, I like to think she had the best of intentions for her own son, but she's a narcissist too. And I think people who are suffering from narcissism are unable to put anybody else first.
That's true. Does anybody want to chime in yet? Okay. The women in Tehran in the 1950s weren't allowed many freedoms as compared to the women in America. Can you talk a little bit about how Roya's family challenges those societal expectations?
Yeah, I mean, in the 20th century and to this day, Iran was very patriarchal, right? It wasn't always, but in the 20th century for sure. And I think um, what we see happening in the middle of the century, so in the 1950s, is there is a big change, a sea change. Women are being educated, the first generation of women to attend university, graduate, work, all of that's happening. But all of that's happening only in the big cities with the upper classes. So it's not available to everyone in the villages. So 1953 Iran would have been different from 1953 US in that the women had less rights than women in the US. But as we see with Patricia, Walter's sister, once she's trying to make a name for herself, women in the US also in the 50s and 60s didn't have like an easy path either. However, the saddest part is that 1953 Iranian women had more rights than women today in Iran. And that, I think, is the tragedy to have had those rights. They started to, expand in their rights in the 50s, 60s, 70s, but then they were taken away. So yes, 1953 Iranian women had less rights than 1953 American women, but more rights than current Iranian women.
Um, Speaking of rights, and I'm sorry if this is my like miseducation or being naive, the women wearing the veils, you mentioned it was imposed a lot by their own moms to keep their skin lighter. I always thought it was a religious respect, why they wore it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, it's cultural and religious. I think the skin thing, I think at one point, like I mentioned, there is in the culture this weird obsession with fair skin. And, Iranians are very multi skin colored, if that makes sense. Like, there's some Iranians in the south who are very dark, and then there's some Iranians in the north who are very, very fair. And there's like a weird hierarchy with the skin color. The veiling isn't related to protection from the sun, really. Maybe that was its origin way, way back. But it's more religious. Like the people who are very devout feel that the holy book says a woman should be modest, cover herself, not show skin, not show her hair. So in the 20th century, by the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you had Iranian women choosing what they wanted to do. So some would cover their hair because that was their belief. Others wouldn't because that was not what they wanted to do. But what happened after 1979 is there was a revolution where fundamentalist religious men took over and they mandated it. And that's the difference, I think. And that's what makes people really upset because it stopped becoming a personal choice, but by force.
That's very interesting. And nowadays, is it Is it still like a skin thing by one's own family or more a political enforcement?
Well, the skin thing isn't really political. That's just
No, but is
cultural.
that something that's still practiced or enforced on their daughters?
No, the skin isn't really enforced. Not at all. That's just like people think if you have fair skin, you're more attractive. So there's some like supremely ugly women, but because they have fair skin, they're considered beautiful. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just
Yes,
like
yes.
it's this weird obsession, but it's not politics. That's
But
if
is that still practiced, like culturally by their own family, or is it more a political thing now?
no, it's not even, it's just like some people's opinion. It's
Okay.
not practiced in any way.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not really related to the dressing or anything.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
Yes?
Not a it's not a question, but I just wanted to say that it was such a beautifully written book. It was just so, like the way you weaved it all together and just, so many unexpected turns, and it just was very captivating, just very, very beautiful. I loved it. Enjoyed it
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Are you planning any new book now?
Yes, I wrote the
Mhm.
next book. So, the next book, actually, I have an advance copy. It's called The Lion Women of Tehran. This book comes out on July 2nd.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so I started writing this. The Stationery Shop came out actually June of 2019, and I started this one that following fall. So yeah,
Right
it'll
away.
be out in 5 months. Not that I'm counting or anything.
Great.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Do you have a favorite of your 3 books?
Ooh, it's a little like saying, do you have a favorite child? Which actually some people do,
Yeah.
even though they pretend they don't. Um, you know what? Each book, when you're writing it, is your favorite and you're completely focused on it. And when it comes out, it's like a newborn and you're very like worried about it. It's super vulnerable. You want to protect it. You want it to be loved. Each book for me has been a form of therapy. Each book has solved for me things that I was grappling with at that stage in my life. So right now, I couldn't write Together Tea. I couldn't write that first book. There's no way on earth I could. I'm glad I wrote it when I did. I don't even know if I could write The Stationery Shop now. But I'm glad I wrote it when I did, because it's almost like when you write it, you get it out of your system. But each book changes you too. Like before I start, I hope you guys don't think I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but before I start, I'm a different person than when I finish, because the book, just going through that process transforms you, the person, because you're like, oh my God, you mentioned, Michelle, that chapter 14, and because I don't plan, I was shocked. I was shocked about their connection. Some of these things I plan and some of these things I don't plan. And it just kind of happens. And then when it happens, you just sit there at your desk. You're like, what? Whoa, I didn't think that. What? She died? I was so shocked when Marigold died. I was weeping and I didn't want her to die, actually. I hope this isn't a spoiler if someone hasn't read the book, but I was sitting on my sofa. I was writing that longhand, and then she died. And I remember I just stopped and I thought, I cannot believe this happened. But it happened. And sometimes things happen and you go back and you're like, should that have happened? Because later, I told you guys in that second draft stage, I'm very meticulous about everything being woven together to make a cohesive whole. So something doesn't really make sense. I hope to fix that.
I was sad when Mr. Fakhri died in the town square.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was tough. I'm like, oh my gosh, no. He's, kind of like this important character in many ways because he obviously like he was like the thread between the past and the present, and he was kind of in both. But yeah, that was unexpected.
And I was like, what was he gonna say?
Yeah, I know. That's the other thing. Like wondering all that time. It was good that you didn't. I enjoyed it. I like that kind of suspense to
Yeah,
like
until the
not
end.
know until the end what he was gonna say, and then kind of play it in your mind what you think, what the possibilities are of what he could have been trying to communicate to her, right? Either warning her to like, stay away from the family, or like, maybe
Tell her the
what it
truth
ended
about the
up being,
letters.
which was like, go meet him
Yeah.
in the square, like so yeah. You mentioned earlier that you have a part-time teaching, and I'm curious, do you teach like writing? Do you teach more literature and, kind of English? Like what do you?
I teach creative writing. So for many years I taught. We have here in the Boston area a big sort of nonprofit writing center where it's called Grub Street, where people can come in from all walks of life. You have advanced people with MFAs, Masters of Fine Arts. You have people who are doctors and lawyers and just want to write a novel or poetry or a short story. So for years I taught there. I taught the novel, actually, how to write a novel. But now I teach at Brandeis. So right now I'm in the research phase, but starting in the fall, I'll be teaching the creative writing students at the university.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you enjoy teaching creative writing or the
I
novel?
love it. I love it. Yeah. You know, it's not even like you can truly teach it, right? Because it's a very slippery thing. But we do a lot of reading and we look at how other writers crafted their stories. And I love talking about craft. I love talking about character development and setting and atmosphere, dialogue, details. How do you use details? Because a lot of these things, hopefully when you're reading, you don't notice, but there's a lot of effort that goes behind it. Like, so for example, in the stationery shop, we basically have four main characters, right? We have Roya and Batman, we have Mr. Fahry, and we have Mrs. Aslan. I would say they're the four main characters. And then there's secondary characters like Walter and Patricia and Zari and so on, Jack. But for the main characters, I go deep, like I do diary entries for them. I need to know who they are. I need to know who they are before you can know who they are. And all the research I do in figuring out who they are doesn't end up in the book. But having done it hopefully helps the book because I did it. So then hopefully, even if you only see 20%, like I think it makes a difference.
Yeah, I enjoyed all the details. Like I could really picture everything that you were saying, like the little coffee shop that he would take her to, and the way that some of the girls were dressed, like in the 50s. I was like, I could totally see everything. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you mentioned
Did-
setting, when you described the food and Roya cooking with her mom and her sisters and the dishes. I didn't know what any of these dishes were, but your descriptions were
Yeah.
so perfect that I could get like an image of what it was that they were all making together. You feel like you were watching a movie, it all playing out.
Oh, good. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, I love to cook myself, and I learned to cook a lot from my own mom, and I just love sharing Persian cuisine. And I'm happy to hear you say that, Michelle, because there was a time when that's all you would have really had was the description in a book. And now, like on Instagram, there's so many Persian food, not bloggers, I guess, I don't know, content creators with their videos, and it's all so cool and very colorful and visual. So yeah, it's fun. I follow them.
In terms of your writing, I'm just curious, is this something you always wanted to do, like write books, or is it something you stumbled upon? Like, what was your, I guess, journey to get to the point to writing your first book?
I always loved reading, and I was always reading. So when I was a child, I remember learning to read. That first word I read, it was barber, and I was so excited. As some of you may remember the Richard Scarry books. Do you guys remember those? Yeah. So I always loved to read, and I would write. I would just write my own stories, plays, poems, but I didn't think you could be a writer if you were the child of immigrants, because my parents are immigrants to this country, and they were very worried always about security, like financial security. And being a writer, I hate to tell you all, is not a very lucrative career or a very stable career, until you make it. But they were convinced that I should be a doctor. That didn't work out. So then a lawyer or an engineer. Like to this day, I think if I was an aeronautical engineer, they'd be really happy. But I'm not. So I think it was really in high school, to answer your question, that it became an option. Like I didn't even know I could be a writer, but my English teacher kind of pulled me aside and said, you should be a writer. And I was like, huh? That's not what, no, we don't do that, you know? Um, it was kind of like, that's not what we do. That's what like these privileged people in my school did, not me.
Hmm.
But then as I got older and I went to college, then I realized this is what I want to do, you know? This is truly what I want to do. I wasn't easy, I won't lie.
You
It
look
took a
so
long time.
Would you be able to give us a little bit of an idea what the Lion Women of Tehran might be about? You
I
can
will
or you
tell
cannot?
you. I will tell you. This is like the first book club where I'm talking about it, so that's
Oh,
exciting.
yay!
There you go. There
Bella
you go.
Vita Styles happening tonight. So actually I've talked about it on social media though. I keep forgetting. I keep thinking like this book is still in my laptop, but it's coming out. So it's a friendship story. So it's about two girls who meet when they're in elementary school and they become fast friends. They come from very different stations in life, and we see them experience the joys of childhood. They cook together, play together, and then they have all the ups and downs of adolescence. But when they go off to university together, one of them betrays the other, and there's a big rupture in the friendship. But decades later, just like in the stationery shop, they reconcile in America. But what made me want to write this story is that I feel like friendship breakups are just as heart-wrenching as romantic ones. And we're really shaped by the friends we make when we're young. Their influence can last even if the friendship doesn't. So I wanted to explore how these two friends shaped each other, even when the friendship, you know, went awry. So it takes place in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s.
Okay, I can relate. Listen, we talking about friendship. We're on our 50-year reunion of our high school. We've many of us connected to the point that now that we're retired, we're traveling together to
Oh my
Europe and
gosh.
everywhere.
I
And
love
some of us have not seen each other in 50 years.
that.
Yes.
Amazing.
So
That's a
see,
novel in and of itself.
yeah,
Where's your next
definitely.
idea?
I
Yep.
love that. Yeah, I'm really into like, as you can tell, people reconnecting after many decades apart. So that's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I'll get the book.
Yes, you
It
can
sounds
pre-order
great.
it now.
Pre-order.
And what is Together Tea about?
Together Tea is a coming of age story. It's about a mother who's so obsessed with math that she makes spreadsheets in Excel to find her daughter the perfect husband. It's really a mother-daughter story. The mother is obsessed with finding the perfect husband for this daughter of hers who's 25. But there's a backstory where we see this family live in Iran before the 1979 revolution with a very different culture and all these freedoms for women. And then the revolution happens, the war happens, the early years of that war, and then they immigrate to the US. So we see them adjust to the United States. It's a coming of age immigration story.
Sounds really pretty too.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Back to the stationery shop. I'm gonna read a quote that was in the reading guide. This was the societal web of the niceties and formalities and expected good female behavior that often suffocated her. But she had no choice but to bear it, to try to navigate within it. That much she knew. Can you talk to us a little bit about the idea of saving face for Iranian women in the 1950s? I feel like this is something that even us in the US and modern day women still have to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah, we still have to deal with it, and it's still very much part of the culture, the Persian culture, that's for sure. So this was a time when there was more formality in everyday interactions, and women were supposed to be good girls, quiet, not rock the boat, not be immodest, and please people, you know? And there's a lot of people pleasing if you're a woman in this culture. So I wanted to explore that. In addition, there is a cultural practice which we call taarruf in the Persian Iranian culture, which is this weird formality in your societal interaction. So, for example, Michelle, if I were to come to your house and you said, "Do you want a cup of coffee?" I would say, "Oh, no, 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 no." And then you'd say, "Oh, really? No. Do you want a cup of coffee?" I'd say, "Absolutely not. Please don't go to trouble." Like you'd have to ask me like 3, 4 times and I would say no. And then you would beg me and then I would say, okay. And there's like this whole dance that you do. So let's say if I said to you, "I like your bracelet," you'd be like, "Oh, please, you must have it. It's yours." There's this whole thing. It's a little outdated, like in our current day life. It doesn't make sense, but people do it all the time, all the time.
Now that you say that, and also reading the book, I feel like there's a lot, people think that culturally we're all so different, but there's so many similarities to like the Hispanic culture, for one, like
Yes.
how Roya dated in the 1950s and how I've heard stories how my mom or aunts dated back then. Like they weren't allowed to go without a chaperone, no public displays of affection. It kind of carries on. And the whole like marrying up in your society, it wasn't as enforced, but it was kind of like insinuated, maybe. Um, I feel like we don't realize how similar we are culturally until you read novels like this and you see the explanations and the descriptions and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so interesting for me as a writer because people write to me and then they say, "You described my family. You described my family, but I'm from Colombia." Or "You described my family, I'm from India. You described my family, I'm from, the American South." Like there's so much overlap. What's fascinating to me is that it's almost like we keep thinking these cultural practices aren't normal because we're in the minority, but this is how actually most of the world is. Do you know what I'm saying? Um,
We just
it's
all think we're the only ones that do it.
yes,
Like
yes,
like each individual culture.
yes, exactly, exactly. But it's not shown a lot on mainstream TV or anything like that, you know?
No.
Speaking of TV and movies and things like that, like when I read The Stationery Shop, I kept thinking like this would even make like a beautiful movie, like just a very like, like love story with tragedy, but historical, parts to it. Like it just, I feel like I couldn't see it. I don't know if that's ever been a thought or if you've been approached about it or it's something you would even consider, like if it's an aspiration that you have.
Well, it was optioned for a TV show. So it was optioned for a TV show by HBO. And it was super exciting for a while, also nerve-wracking. But what happened was because of the pandemic, everything slowed down to a halt. And then once we were climbing back out of all of that, Hollywood was opening up again. But then there was a big merger between Warner Brothers and Discovery, which ate up that division at HBO. And then the writer's strike happened. So, long story short, it's not going to be a TV series, which is sad. But the good news is it's now being considered maybe for a feature film, like you were saying. So, the fingers crossed, fingers crossed. We're discussing it. That would be actually my preference would be a feature film over a TV series.
I feel like it would do well in that category.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see what happens. A lot of these things with TV adaptations or even film adaptations, like they end up going nowhere, but who knows? We'll see.
Your descriptions play out like a movie, even before they took over um when they were going up in the town square where they were like she described like the jugglers and it became like bigger chaos. Like I loved that scene and also the tango scene when he was dancing with his friend and then with her. Like these played out like a movie to me.
I agree with you. I think
Yeah.
those would be nice movie scenes. I agree with you. Actually, I hadn't thought
Party.
about the square scene very much, but now that you say the tango scene, I agree.
I like
That'd be good.
I like the square scene where you were like they're coming up the hill. Like I could picture that and then like it just becoming more and more people until it was like out of hand. That was such a good scene.
Yeah. That's how it happened too. It started off almost like a joke, and then it just became a mob.
It's so scary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, can we talk a little bit about Roya's desire as a young woman to Badri's? Do their societal class influence their actions?
Yeah, I mean, they come from different generations, obviously, but they do also come from different classes. So Badri is like literally a melon seller's daughter. And in Iran at that time, if you were a melon seller's daughter at that time, not today, it would mean your family wasn't educated. They were illiterate. So that's why it was such a big divide. There was no way that Badri, being a melon seller's daughter, could have married Mr. Fakhri, this like son of a scholar. So Badri comes from nothing, and she feels it deeply, which is maybe also why she resents Roya, because Roya's middle class. Her father works, like for the government. He's comfortably middle class. So they also have very different expectations. I think Badri's generation wouldn't have been expected to go to college, right? As a woman, you would get married super young, have kids. Whereas Roya's that first generation of Iranian women who were encouraged to go to college, sometimes even go overseas, as she does, and have careers. It's a big, big difference in the expectations.
And in their behavior too, like Badri was more, I guess, promiscuous or accepting of that, and Roya tried to not have period.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right. She got pregnant.
she did. She did get
Yeah.
pregnant.
I really liked how you described those scenes, I'm sorry, by the
Yeah.
garbage can where it was like implied that there was sexual interaction, but it wasn't
Yeah.
too graphic or too detailed, but then you would get to like in his head, so you would know, okay, that it was probably a little bit graphic, but we didn't get to see the or read that part. That was nice.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was tricky. You know, I didn't want it to be too graphic. I wanted to leave some to the reader's imagination. Um, and yet Badri at the tender age of 14 is very take charge and in hindsight naive, right? But that's who she is. That's who she was. She
She saw it.
changes.
I thought
Mm,
of like she saw it as an opportunity to move up, so she gave in.
yeah, yeah, she was always kind of street smart, right? And savvy. Yeah, yeah. So I wanted the reader to see it, how it could play out from both of their points of view. He's uncomfortable, but he's also attracted to her, and it's very tricky.
My last question that I have about the book itself, if anybody has any others, you can jump in. Can we talk a little bit about Bauman and Walter and their similarities and maybe what she was looking for in each of them while you were writing, like what your expectations were of it?
Yes, I love talking about that. I think so many people think that I, as the writer, feel like Roya should have been with Bahman, right? Or that was her first love, her true love, and Walter's a compromise. At this point, my opinion is just as valid as anyone else's because the book is out. So it's all of you have just as much a stake in this as I do. But if you were to ask me personally, I don't think that Walter's a compromise. I feel like Batman was who he was for that stage of her life. He was exciting. He was an activist. He was an ideologue. He was just this, her first love. It was overwhelming. And one of the reasons she's so sort of stuck on him is because it ended with no closure. It ended kind of abruptly. She didn't get to sit down and talk to him about like breaking up. Also, it coincided with the day her country went through a coup d'etat that changed everything. So in a way, she's kind of obsessed because that's the day everything changed. But I don't think you have one soulmate in this world. I think you can have quite a few. And Roya loved Walter. She loves Walter, and he is stable and steady and kind and incredibly secure to like drive her to see him, right? And they have a shared history. And she loved and loves Bahman. And he was this huge part of her life once upon a time and helped shape who she is too. And I think you can do that. I think you can love two people. And that's just how life is.
I feel like in the book, when I was reading through it and towards the end, I just thought, wow, how lucky was she, right? Like she had these two different loves that were beautiful in their own way, but different, but suited like the times in her life. And it was great for her. Because at first I thought, oh my God, it's, you know, she does she feel like she should be with him? And like, does she have all these regrets or whatever? But I feel like the sense I got was she walked away feeling like happy that she was able to get closure because she never got closure, but feeling very, I think, blessed that she had someone like Walter in her life and that she'd been able to like build her life, you know, the way she did. Like I felt like she just, it was like great that she was able to do both and then get closure at the end with Bauman. So yeah.
Yes, thank you. That was my entire hope. My hope was that the reader would go through this arc with Roya, and in the beginning, she has so much unfinished business. But she has the gift that many people in real life don't have because it's fiction. She has the gift of talking to this person and talking things out, and they are able to come to some kind of healing and closure. And yes, how lucky is she to have had these two men who loved her in very different ways when she was different versions of herself, but in the end, it's a gift to have had that, not like a bad thing. And I think she comes to that conclusion. She's able to reconcile that inside of herself because it bugged her for many, 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 many years. It bugged
Yeah.
her.
Yeah, there were so many unknowns, right? Like she had all these like unknowns in her heart about his true feelings, what happened, why would he do, like, yeah,
Like, how could I have been that
Out of
stupid?
the blue, yeah.
yeah. Like
Yeah.
there was just so many questions that it was, to your point, great that she got that chance to get them answered.
Yes. And Walter loves her so much that he wants her to be healed.
No, what an
So,
involved man. I loved it. I was like, yes, when he was the one driving her, I was like, oh my God.
I know. I was just gonna say that in the beginning when he drops her off at the, I don't remember now, the restaurant or the cafe
Mhm.
to meet him, I was like, what a confident man to be like, okay, go ahead and meet your ex and have this discussion so many years later. Like so many men would be worried or apprehensive or like very machismo, like, no, you're not gonna do that. Why do you need to speak to some other guy again?
yes, I like to think Walter, part of the reason he did that is because he's now 78 and he's had a lifetime to maybe evolve and soften and be with her anyway. Maybe he wouldn't have done it when he was 38. Maybe he wouldn't have done it when he was 48. But I think at this stage in their relationship, he's secure enough and even if he maybe has some mixed feelings about it, he loves her so much that he wants to give her the gift of reconnecting because it matters to her. He's not a narcissist, right? Because he's able to put somebody else's needs ahead of his own.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments about the book? I don't want to take up too much of Marjan's time.
That's good.
Okay, I have two semi kind of fun questions. The
Mm.
first one is, what did you hope to accomplish with publishing this novel?
Ooh. I hope to show readers that you can cherish all the loves of your life. And I guess my hope is that someone reading the stationery shop feels a sense of healing at the end.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
My last question is, we already know what you're working on, so what are you reading now?
Ooh. Well, I'm reading a novel that my daughter's friend wrote
Oh,
because I want to give her feedback.
well, that's
So that's what I'm reading. She's 25 and she has written her first novel and she asked me if I would give her feedback. So I'm reading it and it's surprisingly good. She's so young, but she's very good. And then I'm gonna give her some feedback and send her some chocolates maybe.
And if it gets published, you need to alert us for it.
I will. I'll say, remember back in 2024. Yes.
Before you go, are you okay if we take like a group photo?
Yes, let's do it. Yeah. Whoop.
Let me open
Books.
my e-reader here. Okay, is everybody ready?
Yep.
Do this. Okay. 1, 2, 3. And we'll do one more just in case. Because screenshot gets a little tricky on here. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you, Marjan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
For anyone that's waiting to hear what the next book club pick is, I think I'm going to do a little different this month and put some books out on Instagram for you guys to vote for the next one. So I'll be sharing that this week. So you can vote because I couldn't decide which one, basically. There was too many that I thought. So I'm putting my favorites out there and you guys can pick.
That
Great.
sounds
Awesome.
great.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
guys.
much,
Thank
Michelle.
you,
Thank you
Marjan.
so
And
much.
Thank you,
Great
Marjan.
meeting you.
Yes, stay in
Thank
touch,
you,
It was
Marjan.
everyone.
great.
yes, can't wait to read the next one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll
Lis-
see you on Instagram in the meantime until the next one.
Thank
But
you.
Listen,
Thank you.
come
Thank
to
you.
Miami. Come to Miami. It's nice and warm
Oh
Yes.
my
down
God, I
here.
want to come to Miami so badly. It's so cold and disgusting here.
For
Yeah.
real.
We actually have an independent bookstore here that brings authors very often for conversations about their latest books. So
What's it called?
Books and
I'll write-
Books.
Books and books.
Oh, Books and Books.
and
Okay,
Books.
I'll tell my publicist because she's making the schedule for the fall. So
Yeah. And Tattered Cover in Denver, which is
I
also
know I read
independent.
there for Together Tea.
Oh,
For
nice.
my first
Okay.
book, I read at Tattered Cover, and I
Awesome.
almost fainted because I wasn't used to the altitude. I had just flown
Elevation.
in.
Oh,
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
good.
No, I love that bookstore. Well, thank you all. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank
Sharing your
you.
time and your culture and your stories with us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye. Thank you for joining us, Elsa. Feel free to join us again next time.
Yes,
I
please.
will. A friend of mine told me about you, so that's why I follow you on Instagram.
Oh, great. We
Yeah.
I love
sometimes
it.
have larger groups. It depends on the day of the week or
Of course.
month,
Of course.
but we would
Of
love to
course.
have you again.
Hey, Michelle, do you have an email address by any chance?
Yes, it's Michelle
Uh-huh.
at bellavidastyles.com.
Okay, Bella
Vida Styles.
via style.com.
Mhm.
Perfect. Great. Super. Thank you. Have a great
Bye.
night.
Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.